Well, hello and welcome back for a tag video. It's a nosy one, my favorite. This is an original tag by Steve Donahue with Pariah, the leopard, so nobody can do his tag. And I was tagged by the lovely Bookplastic. So I will link their channels down below. This is a nosy tag, as I said. It gets a little personal, more so than being focused on books. So let's get into the nosy questions. Prompt 1 is a ways out west. Have you ever been to the American West? Yes, I have. I grew up in the American West on the West Coast my whole life. I was born in California and I moved to Washington and grew up in Washington. And then I moved for college and I've been in the Midwest ever since. So I do love the West Coast for sure. Number 2 is Dry Gulch. What's the smallest town you've ever visited? How small is your town right now? I probably don't know the smallest town I've ever visited because I have done the drive from my Midwestern location to the West Coast using multiple different routes over the years. And so that's a 3,000 mile drive. And I've driven through some very sort of tumbleweed towns or villages, you could call them that. Absolutely, I've seen the exciting roadside attractions like the world's largest ball of twine, that sort of thing, the Corn Palace, real bustling cities there. So I've been through definitely some very small towns. In terms of where I sort of grew up was a very small rural area, and I think like my hometown, what I would consider my hometown, even though I lived outside of the town, it was at its biggest, I think, around 25,000 while I was living there. So that was the biggest town in the entire county. That's how things were there, very small towns. So I know that's bigger than many that people have referenced that are in the hundreds. I think probably at this point it has ballooned up slightly toward 30,000 maybe, but I don't know. I haven't been back for multiple years. Number 3, where the buffalo roam. Have you ever seen an American bison in person? Or what's the largest hoofed animal you've ever seen? Or do you have evidence that you live near coyotes? So that's a 3-part question. So number 1, American bison, I would tend to assume I have seen an American bison. I don't know how to visually differentiate them from a buffalo, but I live in a big city where we have quite a lot of like wildlife parks. We do have a major kind of game park that has buffaloes or bison. I'm not sure which. I've been to a game park back home in Washington that's like that. I've been to zoos. So that, as well as the fact that I have been to Yosemite. And Yosemite, I believe, does have bison or buffalo, and I have seen them from my car while driving through there. So possibly saw them there. I don't know. The second one is largest hoofed animal. I'm not sure. That would probably be buffalo or bison that I've seen. And coyotes. I definitely live near coyotes. So I do live in a big city, but I'm in kind of not a rural area, but a very much more green area in the suburbs, and we are near to farmland. So we do get quite a lot of coyotes. Coyotes come into my backyard very often. We'll hear them in the middle of the night because they get very loud. So I do see them in my backyard once or twice a year, definitely, sometimes more, depending. But they love to come hunt the rabbits in my backyard. Let's see, the numbers jumped. So we jumped to 6 there. Old Doc Frye, what's your history with Westerns? Novels, TV, or movies? So my history with Westerns is that I really personally didn't have very much interest necessarily. I read a lot of Christian fiction growing up, and some of that leaned into a Western setting or frontier and settler type setting, big time. That shows up a lot in Christian fiction. As well, my parents, mainly my dad, was very into Westerns. John Wayne, Clint Eastwood showed up as staples of our TV watching all the time. I've probably seen every John Wayne film ever made. And I'm not a huge fan, honestly. So I definitely had at least film Westerns very steeped into my upbringing. And number 7, Diamond Lil at the Rialto saloon. what's your relationship with alcohol? Ever had a friendship with a bartender? So that's kind of a complicated two-part. So in terms of the relationship with alcohol, so growing up, I grew up in a very conservative household. I mean, didn't ever have alcohol around, and even going to college, I went to a very conservative school, really strict. I didn't have any access to drink during college. So it wasn't really until much later in my adulthood, my late 20s, that I even started drinking at all. And I had a roommate who had a kegerator, that sort of thing. So yeah, I did start drinking at that point, but was very sort of casual about it. But then as I got older, I have certainly always had an issue with anxiety. That's a big issue in my life for sure. And I think that fed into having some more issues with alcohol. So I have been very open on this channel about a lot of things in my life, and this is, you know, one of those things that's maybe heavier for some people or potentially triggering, so I'll put that out there. But I have definitely had periods where I would consider myself a functional alcoholic, or maybe daily drinker, where it's not to the point it's healthy, you know, so where it is actually something that should probably stop, and have thought through that and kind of worked myself back off of it. So I have struggled with that, and I know being in those sort of anxiety phases where it's really heavy with me, that turns it into a loop. And that was sort of where I recognized it was a problem, and that I was kind of reaching the aspect of being functionally alcoholic, because I was feeling such extreme anxiety. I would, you know, drink to deal with that or to kind of shut that off, and then it turned into a loop of drinking certainly amps up your anxiety, causes more problems with that. So I think the alcohol was feeding the anxiety, and the anxiety was feeding the alcohol drinking. So yeah, so I have to be a little bit more cautious and careful about when I'm drinking. I do still drink, but I try to make sure I'm being aware if I'm turning to it as, you know, something to say what I'm feeling rather than as, you know, a social thing to do. So yeah, I have to be aware, I think. The other question, bartender. Yes, I have been friends with a bartender. So my primary group of close friends, I would say, came out of a trivia group that I was part of at a dive bar. And this became a very regular place for this group of friends to meet up. And it was such a trashy bar. They would play a lot of like E-movies on the walls there. There were occasionally bands there. It was a really lovely communal place, but it was very dingy, very divey. And everyone sort of, you know, got close because of that. Like, I remember one year being there on Thanksgiving and with my close friends, and we were all hanging out. We're watching a terrible Thanksgiving themed movie. It was really bad. And it was just a great sense of community that formed there, where you could show up there on Thanksgiving and know they would be there, and you would have some place to hang out, you know? So my friends definitely became regulars there. We got to know the bartenders that were always there. And the bartenders there generally worked there for multiple years. So these were not like coming and going. It had been a sort of an established place. So yeah, really great sort of community surrounding that bar without it necessarily being as much about drinking. So yes, have been friends with a bartender. Sorry, I had to go get a book for the next prompt. So the next prompt is The City Slicker from Back East. What do you consider the best Western you've ever read? And I don't know if this is the best Western I've ever read, but it is probably my favorite. This is the Grimlock Demon Hunter series by Ash Armstrong. It is a weird Western starring an orc demon hunter. And it's a great, brilliant fun time, which is exactly what you're looking for from a weird Western. So yeah, I've enjoyed this series immensely. I'm just dying waiting for the next book to come out if there is another one. Then we have number 9, The Man with the Badge. Have you ever been in charge of other people? What's the most authority you've ever handled? And would you be good at it? So again, multi-pronged question here. So I have been in charge of people in that, so growing up I was 10 years older than my younger brother and sister, and so I turned into the de facto babysitter and caregiver in lieu of our mother. So, you know, that is what it is. The older sibling that gets sort of wasted off the younger siblings to take care of them often happens. So clearly I don't have children now, and I have no desire that taught me that I know all I need to know about children, and I definitely don't ever want them. So I have been in charge of people in that aspect. The other way is like as a people manager. I was a team lead very briefly, and I loved my role in my job there, but the team lead part, the actual people managing, I hated. And over the years, if you're aware of the Peter principle, it's people constantly being promoted until they're useless, right? And I feel like I'm at that level where everyone has been pushing me to take a management job as sort of the next step in my career, and I do not want that. I think I would be terrible as a people manager, as an actual management role, and so I have avoided that at all costs. So I've just stagnated at my current role and been perfectly fine with that. Let's see, next one is the Tombstone Kid. Have you ever fired a gun, been a gun aficionado, or been shot? I have not been shot, thankfully. As far as gun aficionado, yes and no. I never really, I didn't think for myself, that's for sure. In my childhood, I did go hunting and shooting out to like firing ranges and that sort of practice lots, that sort of thing. So we had guns around all the time, and hunting was a big part of my life. I went to competition shoots, and eventually I did have an accident with a gun where the scope on a rifle, I was holding the gun wrong, and I don't know why because I was very well trained, but it slid under my arm and the scope hit me in the middle of the forehead. And I had a massive egg on my head. We had to cut bangs, which does not work because I have a huge cowlick on the front of my head, which is like a swirl of hair. And so it looked ridiculous, but I had that cut to kind of cover it, and it just made it worse. So it was a very trying little period there after that happened. And I immediately became scared of guns. And so what happened was not necessarily just that, but multiple things kind of transitioned us more toward being excited about archery. And so I got into competition archery as well. So that has been all a very big part of my childhood up into, I think, mid-teens, really. It was about 15 when I started going to community college, and I just didn't have time anymore that I stopped doing all of that. But yeah, up until that point, I was really big into competition shooting and archery. And then, what is next? 11 is, it ain't the bullet that gets you, it's the fall. How would you ideally like to cash in your chips? I mean, I would hope that quietly at home in bed would be a good option. I would like it to not be painful. So swift rather than drawn out. And I'm very much the person who thinks that longevity for longevity's sake is not a good thing. We see people who get older and aren't willing to face death, and things get prolonged, and they just desperately are doing anything to extend their life while their quality of life is just going downhill. And, you know, dealing with animals a lot, obviously, we have so many more humane decisions surrounding the lives of animals and how we think about that and process the death of elderly animals, that I really think the same way about elderly people. There is a certain quality of life that I would hope to retain, and if that's not retained, I would want to be let go, essentially. I wouldn't want to just endlessly prolong things. So quick and minimally painless, I think, is the answer to that. So that is it for the tag. I'm going to tag Novel Idea, Red Dot Reads, and Miss Reads a Lot to do this tag. I would love to see their answers. So that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching.